today's class. The topic is Recommended Dietary Allowance and Food Composition Table. Food composition databases provide detailed information on the nutritional composition of foods, usually from a particular country. Food composition data may be available in the different formats. If it is on paper, it is known as food composition tables, or if it is online, it is known as nutrient databases or data banks. Basically, these tables or data banks provide the values for energy and nutrients and other important food components for each of the food that's listed. These values are based on chemical analysis, which are carried out in analytical laboratories and are estimated from other appropriate data. So basically, the reason this is done in based on a country is because bread in Japan has different nutrient content than bread in Jamaica or in the Caribbean. So that is why it is advised that different countries have their own nutrient composition table so that it can be compared, and also just for the fact that you want to make sure that when you're doing your different calculations, for whatever reason, that it is accurate. Now I'm going to show you an example of a food composition table for the Caribbean. Alright, so it's giving me a little bit of an issue. Just give me a minute, let me sort that out. Alright, so basically here is the electronic version of the food composition tables for the Caribbean, and basically I am going to show you what an example of it looks like. This is from the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute when it was in Service. Now it is PAHO. Let me see if I can just skip real quick to the information. What I can do is attach this to, we can attach it to in the course so that you would be able to take a look at it, or I could email it to you guys, whichever one works best. So you're going to see a lot of values because you have grams and you also have what they call microgram, right, or international units, so you can look out for these little things. Alright, and in the book itself give you the values. So you can take a look, even a deeper look on everything. Alright, so here we start seeing some values now. Okay, so basically how a food composition table looks now. If you look at this, they separate the items in food groups, and then now from the different food groups that they separate it in, they would even break it down further. As you can see, this is a staples food group that we're looking on, and the first heading that we see is cereals, and under cereals now they give the different types of cereals: barley, corn, the different types of how corn will appear. Is corn chips, is it cornmeal, and if it's cornmeal, is it whole grain cornmeal, which means unsifted and raw, or is it degermed cornmeal or enriched cornmeal, right? You can see now they talk about popcorn. So this is somebody who would just pop the corn in either sugar and syrup coat it. So you can see now that it's very, very detailed. And from this, the look of this book, you can see that it is old. It's an old book. So you have even revised versions that are out there, but this is the one that's available to me at this moment. So everything that is here, all the values that you see, and it's just, you can just take a ruler or use your mouse to see what the value is for each of these. So if you have cornmeal, you would go across to see. If it's whole grain cornmeal, you would go across to see that it contains 12.2 grams of water per 100 gram. So if you have less than 100 grams of cornmeal, then you would have to um, do some calculations to find out how much the value that you have, how much is it here. If it is more than 100 grams, then you would have to do some calculations to find out how much it is, because as these values stand here, is for 100 grams. And let us just scroll down a little bit more. See that corn cereals continue, right? You reach rice and flour and the different types of wheat flour and things like that. What is this here? Still cereals, right? And as I said, everything is per 100 grams. And you see, still the staples group, but now it is starchy fruits, roots, and tubers. So very, very detailed. All right. I think I should show you now an online one to let you see how an online database looks like. Let me just show you that. All right, this is an online database that I personally use and I encourage my students to use if they have some item that it's kind of hard to find. But what I always tell, especially when we teach topics like food labels, and I taught a class that was doing product development where they had to create their own product, something that never existed before, and they also had to make a food label for it. Food composition tables come in handy for things like that, because you are going to use that recipe, the amount of ingredients that you have, and then you can see how much nutrients are in those ingredients, and then you determine your serving size, you determine how much one slice would have, and then it can be reflected on the label, and therefore the consumer that's purchasing the product will be able to see how much nutrient it contains. So this is another food database now, and this is the electronic version, and it's a little bit easier than the using the table, because in the table you would have to look for what it is that you're doing manually, while this, it kind of gives you a more user-friendly feel. So what you would do, example, so this is the database from the United States Department of Agriculture. So you know that you can trust this. This is a reliable source. So let us know. We have half cup of white rice. All right. You have half cup of white rice. Or maybe what I should type is rice. And then we can determine what it is. And as you can see here, you're going to get several options. Several options. You will get from rice cake to all sorts of different brands, and more than likely they give you the American brand, right? And then you would now go through and select the one that speaks to you, right? So you would definitely search. But what I always tell my students is that when you are creating a product, or when you want to know how much nutrient, it's very important that you read the food label, because the food label is the end product of using a food composition table to find out how much of what is in what. All right, so back to the PowerPoint. So now that you see an example of what a food composition table is like, and that the fact that it gives you the amount of nutrients, whether macro or micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, fat, protein, and carbohydrates that is available to a specific amount, in this case 100 grams of a specific food type, Now let's see. Let's see the different uses of food composition tables. Now, the information that is available on a food composition table are essential for a variety of purposes, very important for different fields of work. For example, the assessment of energy and nutrient intake for individuals or groups. And you will realize that on a local level, on a national level, the Ministry of Health would use food composition tables to determine specific things for different research and how to implement certain policies. Right? They are also necessary to assess the effect of diet on health and disease outcome, and therefore an essential prerequisite to epidemiological research. Ultimately, they help in the development of dietary guidelines for population groups and in planning menus for schools, hospitals, prisons, and the armed forces. And something that jumped out at me as I read that sentence is dietary guidelines. I am wondering how much of you guys even know that Jamaica has dietary guidelines, and there are dietary guidelines for the Caribbean, and different Caribbean countries have their own dietary guidelines derived from the dietary guidelines of the Caribbean, and even the United States of America have their own dietary guidelines. England, different countries have their own dietary guidelines, and these come from food composition tables. So the food composition tables help in the development rather of these dietary guidelines. They have been used to plan the food ration requirements for polar expeditions. The wide range of applications in a variety of other sectors include clinical dietetic practice, that's in the hospital setting, sports nutrition, the food industry, example, product development, as I mentioned before, and food labeling, government food and health departments, especially with setting certain targets, and in nutrition, education, and health promotion. So, I am hoping now that you have an understanding of what food composition table plays and the importance that it has on health and disease and helping to prevent certain things, and also for important information dissemination. Now, another important nutrition resource that is very useful is called the Recommended Dietary Allowance. Now, basically, recommended dietary allowance means the amount of nutrients sufficient for the maintenance of health in nearly all people. Now, let me just give you a scenario. We have been learning about the different nutrients, right? We know that there are protein, carbohydrate, fat, minerals, and vitamins. But we have different stages in the life cycle. You have an infant, toddler, a child, a teenager, and young adult, an adult, and then you have the elderly. Now, for the different stages of the life cycle, nutrients are important, all stages. But at different stages of the life cycle, there are certain nutrients that you would require more of or less of. But how is it that you know how much you are supposed to consume of a specific nutrient? How is it that you know you want to put a value to it per se? You have something that we call the recommended dietary allowance. The thing about the recommended dietary allowance, though, is that it doesn't apply to sick people, right? And also, it it is it is an average of the minimum requirement and the safety margin. So basically, you cannot go you cannot go below this. So, for example, the recommended dietary allowance for protein is 50 grams. That means you cannot go below 50 grams, because sometimes in different recommended dietary allowance will give you um, a range, or they may give you a specific value. You cannot go below that recommended dietary allowance, and sometimes you cannot go too far above it. It's like a safe zone, right? But the thing about the recommended dietary allowance is that it's not individually based. It's based on it's an average of hundreds of people. So it is just like a guideline, right? So let's get more into it. The recommended dietary allowances for the Caribbean were published in 1976 by the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute. At that time, these were based on a reference man described as someone who is healthy, between 20 to 39 years of age, weighing 65 kilograms for the man and 55 kilograms for the woman. And they are of moderate activity, that is, engage in 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of light activity, household duties, and active recreation. So that is what the RDAs, that's another acronym for it. The RDAs were built on someone who is healthy. So that is why the RDAs is not for a sick person, because when you are sick, you will require more of one or more nutrients and less of some, depending on what the illness is. Here's an example of what a recommended dietary allowance would look like. This is not one for the Caribbean. There was none that was available to me soft copy, and when I tried to scan it, it just would not work. So I got this and I thought it would do good. This is for Canada. And basically, as you can see, here are different listing of some vitamins and some minerals. Notice the values that you see, microgram, and this is per day, milligram per day. All right. And then it lists the different stages in the life cycle, but this goes up to 18 years. Now you have other RDAs now that would go on to 20, in the 20s, in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s, go straight up to 100. And then you would have specific ones like for pregnant women, right? Because that is a stage of the life cycle when a woman is pregnant, because her body goes through so much changes. And then you have one for the breastfeeding woman or lactating woman, because in lactation too, your body goes through a lot, and the requirements for different vitamins and minerals and even the macronutrients, carbohydrate, protein, and fat, will increase or lessen based on the person. So as you can see, here is the different stages in the life cycle for this. And for each stage, there is a value here. So that is what a recommended dietary allowance would look like. So for example, you have a daughter who is 4 years old and you want to know or have an idea of how much vitamin A she should be consuming per day. Here it is, 400 microgram. And then now, you can look on her diet. Remember nutrient assessment, you would have learned about doing a 24-hour recall or a food diary where persons would write down or list the different items that they would eat and the amount. You could now use those items that they have listed or you have recorded of someone and go to a food composition table and write down all the nutrients that they have eaten for each of these foods, and you could add up for the vitamin A column, add up and see if all of it comes close to 400 microgram per day. And that's how it can be used. Here is another one asking the question, how much protein do you need? Here is the different stages in the life cycle, and now it's mentioned pregnant and lactating, but this also speaks about athletes. And then the gender, that's the next thing that I didn't even mention here. The gender is also here, because you know that the amount of nutrients required for each gender is different, right? So here's another example, and you can go through on your own and do your own research to just help. All right. RDAs are research-based and do not match exactly individual requirements. They apply to groups of people rather than individuals. Remember, I mentioned that before. In contrast to recommendations for nutrients, those for energy are intended to reflect the average levels believed to be adequate for the stipulated population. So if you are using a recommended dietary allowance, you have to pay attention to where it comes from, because it might not apply to whoever or the group of persons that you're doing. So if you're doing someone from the Caribbean, you have to use the RDA from the Caribbean. If you're doing someone from the US, you have to use the US RDA, because it will differ for different persons. And factors that influence someone's nutrient intake can be age and growth and gender and climate conditions and health. All of these are factors which RDAs would take into consideration based on different researches that they have done. So it is very important that you look on where it is coming from and use it appropriately. RDA values for the Caribbean are stated for energy, protein, several vitamins and minerals, which are listed according to gender and age groups, which I've mentioned before. Now, how can RDAs be used? RDAs are intended principally to be used by professionals in the field of nutrition for assessing nutritional needs in the following situations. And why we say they are intended for the professionals, because they would know how to use it. The amateur might not be able to manipulate it as well as someone who is trained, right? They can be used in situations like as standards to interpret food consumption data in relation to the assessment of nutritional status of different age groups, different groups of the population. I don't know if any one of you were in any of the Ministry of Health. Sometimes they send out persons in the field to ask different Jamaicans what they eat at supermarkets and stuff, and they would perform simple nutritional assessment in the supermarkets or at the shops or on the road to get an idea of what the food consumption is in Jamaica. They might take feedback from different supermarkets as to what always selling and stuff. And these just help the government, especially the Ministry of Health, to ascertain what they need to do if there's a lot of incidences of like cancers and diabetes, non-communicable diseases, which can be controlled by the change in your lifestyle. It can also be used for planning diets and assessing adequacy of food supplies in institutions such as hospitals and prisons and school feeding programs and others. It can be used to evaluate the adequacy of national food supplies for calculating food supplies in case of like a hurricane, right? They can also be used as a basis for nutritional labeling and for the control of nutrient claims, such as product X contain all the daily requirement of nutrient Y. Because they know that is on the market so much. People telling you that this box of juice contains 100% the daily value of vitamin C. A lot of this, when they are developing a product and they have to be passed by the Bureau of Standards, these are some of the things that Bureau of Standards would look at: the content of the box juice and relate it to the RDA and see if they really are providing 100% of the daily value needed or the requirement for vitamin C. It can be used for nutrition education programs such as this, or on a national level when they have a social campaign being launched for different parts of the population. All right. As I mentioned before, RDAs have certain limitations because it is on a group level and it's not on an individual level. And RDAs can only be applied when requirements for other nutrients and energies are fully met. Right? So you cannot be deficient in protein, but you're looking to see if you meet the requirement for vitamin A, because at this remember that the references that it was used for was for the healthy person. So it has to be under normal environmental conditions. It cannot be used in malabsorption syndromes and metabolic abnormalities or nothing like that. The person has to be a healthy person who is consuming food regularly, and it's just a guide. But you can't, if somebody is suffering from some form of illness, then the RDA would not be applicable for them, because you would have to tailor their diet to meet the need of whatever sickness it is that they have. All right, so that's the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm hoping that you have learned something about the use of food composition tables and recommended dietary allowance. And now, when you look on different labels and you see it be claiming that it has 100% of the daily value for required vitamin C or A, or so, you will know exactly. Um, you could look up for yourself, you could research for yourself to see if they are indeed true, or but you would understand exactly what they're doing. All right, thank you.